In the late 1800s, the thought of a horseless carriage was unheard of. However, a local company in Warren, Ohio, known as Packard Automotive, proved this to be possible. How did they do it? Just ask the man who owns one.
First, they thought the automobile was a crazy thing, that you would take the horse off the front of it and try to have this thing go down the road without a horse there. And one of the hazards of that was that the horse thought it was a runaway carriage because there was no horse. And he, as he got nearer to it, if you're around horses, they can get pretty hairy, and so they would then rear up in the air and throw the people out. Well, the Packard brothers started two other companies before the automobile company, and it was the light bulb company and the electrical company.
They made transformers, wires, ignition cable. Packard owned lumber mills, hardware stores, so they were quite the conglomerate and had a lot of product.
And they did W.D. Packard, which I know you've heard of. He was a traveling man. He was always in New York City or St. Louis or Chicago, and so when they built their first cars, he would promote automobiles as much as he would promote the electrical wires and light bulbs that they made.
Packard automobiles were known as the luxury cars of the early 1900s. But what made the Packard brothers want to start building their own cars? In 1899, W.D. Packard was on his way home from Cleveland, where he had just bought a Winton car. On the way home, though, the car broke down, so he wrote a letter to Mr. Winton explaining what he thought should be done to the car to improve it. Mr. Winton replied with, "If you think you can do better, build your own car." And so later that year, Packard produced a prototype of their car, and in 1900 they released their first production car, the Model A.
I think Packard did the first car because of the challenge that was issued from Winton. When Winton said if you do better, build your own, and he proved he could. Packard lasted into the 50s. Winton went by the wayside.
Packard cars differed in cost and quality compared to other companies such as Ford. The reason being, Packard built the cars for the rich man, not the everyday man.
They were competitors, just put it that way. But in a different category, Ford would sell a car for $295 brand new, and Packard's, they didn't start out, they were, let's see, I have to think, $2,000 or $2,500 in the one cylinders. Like, that'd be like buying a Rolls Royce today, which would be $250,000 or something like that.
Packard was making a car for the rich man. So they didn't really cross that much other than innovations in engineering. Everybody had crank start early in the beginning. When the first electric start came out, the next year pretty much everybody had electric start. So as soon as somebody made an innovation, somebody else would expand upon it, make it their way. Packard had the first H-pattern transmission for the 3-speed shifter. Their mechanism was their way to do it. Ford made a different mechanism. The Model T was a 2-speed car with a planetary transmission. This is a 3-speed car. And Ford operated their transmission on the Model Ts with a set of pedals and a lever, where Packard used the H-pattern.
Their engine work, I'll tell you how good their engine work was. We had a 12-cylinder aircraft engine in the museum. Rolls-Royce hired Packard to build that engine. What's that say? That says they built a better engine than Rolls-Royce did, which is supposedly the top car in the world,
There was one small connection between Ford and Packard, which involved Henry Ford himself and George Weiss, a former partner of Packard. This ended with Ford earning his fame he is well known for.
George Weiss in Cleveland was in the same circle as Henry Ford, and he was the third investor. There were three of them. He got left out of a lot of times, but it was because no one knew that he was connected to the company until I came along, contacted his grandson and asked him, "What do you know about your grandfather?" And he said, "I have a trunk that's in my closet of everything that he had that involved the Warren, Ohio Packards." And he had never opened it. I mean, he was raised with his grandfather out in Hollywood. They moved from Cleveland, where he was based, And he came down from Cleveland to join the Packard brothers. But then when he left the company, he took 10 brand new 1904 Packards in exchange for all his Packard stock. Henry Ford and George Weiss, they talked about joining each other to build an automobile. So that's a little tidbit that is a fact. And Henry, it was just probably maybe a matter of months or something that they ended up not doing it and separating, and he built the first Ford.
At that time, Packard didn't use a moving assembly line. Each car was built standing alone, and Ford implemented the moving assembly line and therefore was able to produce a lot more cars a lot faster. But they weren't into the quality of a Packard. They were basically the everyman car.
Packard may not have produced the amount of cars that Ford did, but they were one of the largest companies to ship across the seas to other countries.
Packard didn't have the production numbers that Ford had, but they sold all that they produced. Packard had a huge export business. They sold cars all over the world. India, South America, Europe, Russia. Tsar Nicholas II had a Packard, had a fleet of Packards.
The local automotive company didn't stay in Warren for too long. A few years into the industry, they moved to Detroit, Michigan, where they remained until they were shut down in the late 1950s.
They were here until the fall of 1903, and that's when some really big money people came in from Detroit, and they pursued them. The Packard brothers, they like to accomplish things in life, like start Packard Electric and the New York Mag Company, which they sold to GE in 1905, and it still goes on, you know.
And the Detroit investors said, we'll fund your project, but you must build in Detroit. So in 1904, the motor cars were built all the way to the end, from 1904 till 1954 in Detroit, 55 and 56 in South Bend along the Studebaker.
By the 1930s, Cadillac had pushed past Packard as the luxury car of America. With sales dropping, Packard merged with Studebaker in the 1950s in hopes to regain their title. A few years later, they still weren't able to meet the demands to continue, and in 1956, the last true Packard rolled off the production line, ending the automotive company of Warren, Ohio. This will forever keep the two cities of Detroit, Michigan, and Warren, Ohio connected.